Oh god, yeah.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Between Buckets podcast. My name is Lucas Pearce, and joining me is the attractive, intelligent, always charismatic Patrick Cross.
I knew there was a reason I woke up this morning feeling good about myself.
For the first time in how long?
I don't even know if there was a time before that.
Well, you're sounding particularly handsome today.
I know. And athletic.
Must be a pleasure.
Yeah, I think I figured this life thing out.
Sounds good to me.
Is this what it's like being Patrick every day?
It's not bad. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about everyone's favourite team to love or favourite team to hate, the Boston Celtics, and their surprising start to the season. Then we're going to shift gears and go into a bit of Brandon Ingram talk, and I think Lucas will blasphemously compare him to one Ben Simmons, which will start a heated debate, I'm sure.
Spoilers.
And finally, we're going to pivot to Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and the duo out in Los Angeles Clippers, their debut, looking how it's gone so far and what it means for the rest of the season. Are we ready, Lucas?
We're very much ready, Patrick.
Lovely. We'll be back after this quick plug. If, like Lucas and myself, you enjoy a side dish of written analysis to go with the main meal, which is this podcast, then you should head to BetweenBuckets.com. On the site, you'll find feature articles looking at topics such as Giannis's MVP defense, a critical year for Ben Simmons, and our top 25 player rankings heading into the 2019-20 season. Be sure to check it out, as there are some contentious names challenging conventional wisdom and some familiar faces in declining places. Also, be sure to follow Between Buckets on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more updates and analysis. Back to the pod. Alrighty, Lucas, one team that started the season particularly hot, but we can talk about how valid that is and what it truly means, is the Boston Celtics. And so currently looking at it as of time of recording, they're sitting in a three-way tie for second place in the East. We got Milwaukee up top at 14-3. Then a game and a half back, you've got a three-team cluster. You got Miami, Boston, and Toronto, all currently on 12-4. And then a couple of games back, you got your Phillies and your Indianas and so on. But Boston got a lot of headlines towards the start of the season. Although losing the opening game to Philadelphia, they then went on a 10-game run, and they looked really promising. This guard rotation was, answering criticisms that they'd had a lack of big man bodies up front, and they proved that that guard wing rotation can be successful. But I want to throw it to you, Lucas. What did you make of the Celtics start to the season? Do you buy them going forward as an elite Eastern Conference powerhouse, or do you still think there's a gap between them and some other Eastern Conference contenders?
It depends what you mean. Do you think they're a contender, as in like they can really make it out of the East, or do I think that they're just going to make noise in the second round?
Contender either in the sense that they could challenge for the top seed in the East, or that they could potentially come out of it.
Well, I mean, the first part of that question, I don't think a top seed ever means anything. I think the Atlanta Hawks can give testament to that back when they were rallying against LeBron James's Cleveland Cavaliers and got swept in the Eastern Conference Finals, I think 3 or 4 years ago. I think they could definitely get the first seed, but I think it is that Atlanta Hawk meaningless first seed, in that they've done a lot better than I expected them to do. I expected the absence of a legitimate big man or a legitimate defensive big man to really affect them. But they've really won some great games. The point is, and I know you are very quick to point this out in some of our previous discussions about the Celtics, they haven't won that many games that are of significance, in that they haven't beaten that many elite teams. If we're looking through their 10-game win streak, it was against the Raptors, which I think is an elite team. The Knicks, not so much. The Bucks, again, elite. The Knicks, not so much. The Cavs, Hornets, Spurs, not so much.
Rest in peace.
And then really, like they won against the Mavs. At that point, we hadn't really bought into the Mavs. But I think they've been two bona fide superstar teams that we all expect to be there in the later rounds of the playoffs. They lost to the Nuggets They lost to the Clippers, which really they should have. I feel like that was expected, at least from my angle of looking at things, because, again, I think Denver and the Clippers have so much more versatility to them, and they just exploited that. So in terms of their contender status, I think they're a pretender in that I see them being a second-round exit. Just watching the Sacramento game yesterday, the way that they could crash the paint, and obviously Buddy Hield exploded, but even he was getting to the ring, and he's not, I wouldn't say he's the pedigree of driving to the bucket and getting a layup. And even, Holmes, which is their center, and Dwayne Dedman, who I forgot still had a contract in the league. I mean, they got 10 points between them in the paint. And I was just watching, Cantor when he was on, and the way that they contained Giannis was impressive in that they implemented a strategy that was more reminiscent of the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, where they would just set up a wall, they'd clog the paint, and they'd force Giannis to make tough passes that he's not quite used to making and executing. But I think for the Philadelphia, the 76ers, they should hope to all of the gods that they don't get them in the opening round, because Philly's just going to destroy them on physicality alone.
Yeah, I agree. I think going into the season, the lack of a big man interior presence was the clear criticism. I think so far that holds up. But the guard/wing rotation has proven that they are going to be frisky, and I don't think they're going to be an easy out. I think they're going to be the kind of team when they do have a really formidable wing depth. I mean, Kemba, Tatum, Jaylen Brown, who I really like, and Hayward when he's healthy, which he should be back around Christmas time, so plenty of time left in the season. That group of four, plus Marcus Smart on defense, they're going to have nights where they're going to look really good. They're going to drive, slash, they've got some shooters, and I think they're going to have big scalps and big wins throughout the season. And I think they're going to look good, and some nights they look really good, other nights they're going to get killed in the paint, especially if they're going up against a physical team like a Philly, or, as we saw with Denver with a Jokic, someone like that who can destroy them, really. But
yeah, and I think Robert Williams III, his development across the season is integral to any real playoff success that Boston fans would be hoping for. And I've seen it. He's a great rim runner. I think the that role, both him and Daniel Tice fit into. I don't think there's any issues in terms of their own egos, their agendas. They've got these sets and they're executing them, but they need more than that. If you look at, again, we'll go back to the Bucks, because I think that game in itself serves as significance as to what they can do. They held Giannis to 22 points and 14 rebounds, which obviously is a below average game for Giannis, but is still, quite sizable. And in that game, Middleton stepped up, and it was about really perimeter shooting in the end, because Giannis didn't get his 30 points.
Middleton always tortures the Celtics just quietly.
Yeah, he really does.
The Celtics fans hate him because he's not the greatest player. He's a solid player, but when he plays against the Celtics, he looks like a superstar.
Oh, absolutely. Like he probably got his max money off Celtics highlights. And I mean, there's been instances of poor shooting, but when we look at kind of the teams that are bigger than them and have that versatility, it comes down to the rebounds and the points in the paint, and they just haven't been able to keep up with them. And as for the Nuggets, which was that other elite team that we talked about, if you look back at that game, it was the first quarter that lost them. Just the momentum that Nuggets pulled out and the way that they were drawing them in the paint and also executing from the three-point line. That was really... And they didn't even shoot the ball that well, but that was their offensive sets, and it just happens to be that the Joker can draw two men and then find them. And I think that's what separates the Joker from Giannis if we're looking at that asset. He can make the pocket pass, he can make the backside pass, he can hit from the strong or the weak side. I think Giannis just hasn't been able to do that yet, as evidenced by, being eliminated by the Raptors last year. I think there are a lot of people that thought Milwaukee was going to do that. For Boston, though, I'm just concerned because I think when things get slower in the playoffs, and it's all about that grind, Marcus Smart cannot guard all five positions at once. I'm not saying he can't guard all five positions one-on-one, but the strength and the intensity that he brings...
Yeah, I agree, but I suppose the counter to that is if we're looking at Milwaukee and Philadelphia in a potential Eastern Conference matchup with the Celtics, neither of them have that guard wing rotation depth that the Celtics do. And I suppose the counter that a Celtics fan might throw at us is that could you not see them out shooting, out slashing a team 4 times out of 7? Do you think that's possible?
I mean, that's a good question, but honestly, can you see them out shooting some of the more elite teams? I think Philadelphia...
I think it's plausible. I think, sorry to cut you off, but I think Philadelphia definitely has that problem of wing shooting, and there's going to be nights against Celtics where they're going to heat up, and I think they're going to be a really difficult team to stop if they get going.
I mean,
they're really well coached. They can cover holes, but ultimately I agree. I think in the playoffs, when the game slows down, you can usually get away with a bit more from the refs. I think physicality and size is going to be ultimately their downfall, but I think it is plausible that team can be coached and could maybe shoot and slash their way into an upset victory somehow.
I mean, are we talking like individual games or series? Because
I'm talking more so individual games. I think there is probably a world where they heat up and they could beat in Milwaukee or Philadelphia. I'm definitely not putting my money on it. I definitely think it's a slim chance, but I wouldn't entirely rule it out, and I wouldn't particularly want to match up against the Celtics if they're with full health, of course.
I guess what it comes down to is whether or not Jason Tatum, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, Hayward, Smart, whoever is the focal point of that particular offense at that time, can dictate the way the game is played. Because I don't think they have the shooting to the three-point shooting. Their best shooter right now, if we're looking at three-point perimeter shooting, is Gordon Hayward, and he was jacking up 3.8 attempts a game and hitting it at 43%, which is elite. But beyond that, they don't have another three-point shooter that's north of 40%. And in the playoffs, getting that shot and dictating a three-point heavy offense takes a lot of work. And you need people that can be respected from the line. And granted, they're all I think everyone outside of Marcus Smart right now in that starting lineup, and obviously their big man, is shooting above 35%, which is above average. But I just don't know if they can really talk another team into indulging in just let's shoot threes. I think if it's Philadelphia, obviously Philadelphia's going to play big. If it's Milwaukee, and this would obviously be the second round because I think they're all going to be top 4 finishers. But if it's Milwaukee, it'll be Giannis's give and go. And Milwaukee does have some shooting in their own right. They lost Brogdon, which we've hampered on about and probably too much, but at the end of the day, do I think they can get through the first series based off, beating people on any given night with shooting or just Brad Stevens' poetic offensive rotations? I do. But I don't see them getting past the second round, and I don't think they can win 2 games against the probably 3 teams in the East.
Yeah, ultimately I agree as well. On the 3-point thing, I was just checking out some of the numbers, and Boston are currently shooting the 12th most threes per game, which wasn't as high as I would have expected for such a guard and wing-oriented team. And Milwaukee are surprisingly at second, with 41 attempts a game. I mean, if we're looking at Philadelphia as well, they're down at 22nd, no surprises there. But Milwaukee, surprisingly, are actually shooting more than I thought, and with the same percentage thereabouts as Boston at 34% as a team. So I would have thought that something like that would have been the feather in the cap of a Boston sort of team, something that they can sort of hang their head on. But I would have thought more so that that's something that this Boston Celtic team would be looking towards, that 3-point line, slashing, drive, kick sort of team. And I think that's the only pathway for them to potentially take down a Milwaukee or Philadelphia. But ultimately, I agree. I don't see it. I think someone like Embiid or Giannis for both teams could just destroy them, and I don't know what answers they have for them.
But even like Toronto, I think over a 7-game series in the second round, I could envision them also being able to overwhelm them just by Ibaka, Gasol, and the combinations that they can do with, the pick and pops, because both of them are now shooting threes. And that was 5 years ago, that wasn't something either one of them I could really see doing at any significant clip. But Ibaka from the corner, you've got Siakam, who they're already going to be clogging the paint for. There's just spacing there. And if we go back to the champions of the last few years, they've all had versatility, from like Andrew Bogut that anchored a heavy shooting off 3-point shooting offense from the Warriors, to Kevin Love, to Toronto. They've all been there, and I just think they're either one piece away or they're one leap away. And again, we've got Marcus Smart playing like a defensive player of the year. Tatum does seem to be taking some step. I know Jaylen Brown has certainly taken that leap, and Hayward, it's fantastic to see him putting up the numbers that he is. But I just think with the personnel they've got and their projected finishes for the seasons in regards to performance, I just can't see them getting there.
Yeah, I agree. So have you given up on Taco Fall as the defensive anchor of this team and ultimate Joel Embiid stopper, or?
Well,
He's still got that stock, or?
I have a huge respect for Taco and everything that he has put himself through to make it to the league and achieve his dream. But if you look at his numbers, he's played one game and his efficiency is 7 points below average. And I just can't quite see him being ready for playoffs.
I can't see him ready for
April.
stepping on an NBA court again, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, look, it's too early to call. I feel like ask me again in another 40 games, and if he's played another 3 games, then maybe I'll be more open to him.
Probably not going to swing the fate of the Celtics.
No, I don't think so. I think he was a crowd guy, and he did that. Everyone loves him.
Everyone does.
I love him, Patrick. Shout out to Patrick. Sorry, shout out to Taco.
I'll take the shout out, though. Alrighty, we're going to leave it there, and we'll be back after this quick message.
This is a call out for watch enthusiasts everywhere. The Quick20 Network is growing, and we now have our very own watch hobbies website. So head over and visit thenextwatch.com. That's THENXT watch.com. With a ton of reviews, features, and weekly columns on watches under 4 figures, thenextwatch.com has it all.
Alrighty, Lucas, one thing that's been bouncing around the NBA media a fair bit in the last week or two has been this sort of rise and emergence out of the New Orleans Pelicans. Not Zion Williamson, unfortunately, maybe soon to be in the coming months, but it's been a surprise, well, maybe not so surprise, we can get into that as well, but this sort of step forward that Brandon Ingram has taken, and whether this jump that he's taken so far coming to the Pelicans, is it legit, is it sustainable, does it change the perceptions that we've had of him in the past? And one thing particular that's caught our attention, that we saw the Jumps talked about it a little bit, but also one of our favorite podcasts, the Ringer NBA podcast with Kevin O'Connor and Chris Vernon, talked about, is this comparison between Brandon Ingram and Ben Simmons. Of course, it was the big question leading to the top of the 2016 NBA draft. It was one or two, who's the better player, Ben Simmons, Brandon Ingram. And obviously at the time, I'd say the general consensus was that Simmons was the better player going into the draft. There were a few Brandon Ingram advocates around, but I think for the most part it was a Ben Simmons majority. And then obviously over the first couple of years of their career, I think everyone, well not everyone, but just about everyone would shift towards Ben Simmons as the better player. But with this sort of a rise of Brandon Ingram that we've seen so far at the start of this season, 13, 14, 15 games in, a lot more has been said about, is the gap between them as big as we thought over the last couple of years? Is it slimming? Is there a gap? Has Brandon Ingram overtaken him? It's a really interesting question and reflection on that draft, but I just wanted to check in with you, Lucas. Where do you stand on it? Do you think Ingram's hot start to the season has changed your perception of the comparison between the two players?
My thought process about the whole thing is kind of twofold. One, is this conversation really justified? In that you're perfectly right in that Ben Simmons, all-star last year, putting up all-star numbers his entire career. Ingram, huge letdown. Efficiency was a huge issue. The way he played the game was outdated. And I think if we go 2 years ago and tell people this conversation is going to be had, they'd be pretty confused. Lakers fans would be cheering, obviously. Well, not anymore. But it's mind-boggling if you look at kind of the jump. Ingram had spurts of it. There are always these, microcosm stats of the month of February last year and, these shooting splits that over these 10 games. But there was that consistency and that was the issue. And I think that is the only real obstacle or piece of evidence that detracts from this celebration of what he's done. And it is this question of efficiency that's going to continue to loom over him for the remainder of this season. So once you answer that question, in terms of, is this conversation really justified? Is it disrespectful? I think the answer is no. I think it's, in terms of, I don't think it's disrespectful. I think this conversation is 100% justified because Ingram is playing at a level that is all-star worthy. If it was anyone else, he'd be on track for being an all-star. And it's only because of these first 3 seasons that we're saying anything else, or that we're approaching this with any hesitation.
And because of his the state of his team at the moment. I mean, the Pelicans are not a good team. They're at 6-11. Ingram is putting up some great numbers, which we're happy to run through. But at the moment, I think, and obviously being in the Western Conference as well, maybe if Brandon Ingram was doing this on the Pelicans team, say if we just in a vacuum put them in the East, maybe his all-star candidacy is more of a conversation. But I think it's not just Brandon Ingram. I think that the team being bad and the fact that he's in the Western Conference is why he isn't probably getting the attention he might necessarily deserve.
Look, you're right in that I think it's about in terms of the attention, wins generate attention. And yeah, he's not doing that. But in terms of using that as a way to pillow some of the numbers he's doing, I think that I'm not so sold on that. All his advanced numbers are fantastic. His individual numbers are fantastic. And so is, the win shares. He's checking with Ben Simmons. The individual stats, he's right there with Ben.
Yeah, if somebody hasn't been following Brandon Ingram much this season, probably fair enough, but he's had a hot start. So through the 13 games, he's currently at 26 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and the efficiency, as you mentioned, is pretty elite. He's shooting 50% from the field, 45% from 3 on over 5 attempts per game, and he's getting to the line over 5 times a game, and he's shooting 77%. So he's putting up pretty elite numbers across the board, and he's doing it at a surprisingly efficient clip. I mean, if somebody told me before the season that Brandon Ingram was going to average 25 points, I'd definitely be surprised. But on this Pelicans team, especially with Zion out, I would have thought, he's going to get a lot of shots up and it's probably going to be inefficient. But the fact that he's putting up these numbers with that level of efficiency, that's probably what is surprising me the most.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even if we dig deeper into it, his true shooting's at 60%, and you can't really
That's
say
really
that.
elite.
That's James Harden level. That's LeBron. They're the type of numbers, and I don't know if it'll stay there, because part of what is bumping that up would be his 3-point percentage. He doesn't take a lot of free throws, which is why I'm thinking, 45% from 3 is pretty incredible. And even if that dipped to, maybe 40%, 38%, I think that leap, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where it goes. I think he's still going to shoot the ball well for the rest of the season. But yeah, I think 45% it's a really incredible number, and I wouldn't be surprised if it dipped just a little bit. What's interesting, though, is kind of where his shots are coming from and the rate that he's playing at. If you look at some of his past years, he's been called out for taking, those ridiculous long twos that I think Jason Tatum was also told to kind of forsake in the off-season.
The Mubba mentality.
Yeah,
Kobe sabotaging the Celtics just quietly.
like last season, he's getting to the ring around 5.5 times, free throw line, 5.5 times a game. But what really sticks out to me is he's been given a lot of more free reign, and it's almost as if he can methodically, do it on his time. And that doesn't mean he always plays slow, because he can just accelerate, and in transition, he's brilliant. But I think there is a freedom there, which has not been afforded to him the last few years, and that's for a myriad of reasons. But it's translating to a whole bunch of good little improvements. And yeah, sure, his defense is sometimes there and sometimes it's not, but I think it is worth pointing out he is averaging nearly a block a game and nearly a steal a game. And that block particularly is fantastic if you're wanting for positionless basketball, and that's the direction of where the Pelicans are going now. Zion will be he's an anomaly, and I think Ingram could very well complement that, particularly on the defensive end in their versatility and being able to guard so many different positions.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to the season. It'll be interesting to see not only whether these numbers are sustainable, but also particularly with reference to Zion coming back. Does Zion eat into some of those points? I think I'd probably expect so at least, but can the Pelicans make a bit more of a leap and chalk up a few more wins to get Ingram a bit more attention? I think that'll be a really interesting question. But just shifting back to whether, in terms of the gap and the comparison with Ben Simmons, do you think by the sounds of it, you think the gap between them is definitely narrowed?
That's a tough one because I don't want anyone to lose their minds. Are we talking about potential? Are we talking about over this season solely? Are we talking about careers? Because that right now, Ben Simmons career-wise is in a much better position. He's got one glaring flaw that's stopping him and his team from really ascending the Eastern Conference. As for Brandon Ingram, I think over a small sample that is 15 games for these players that we're comparing, he has outplayed Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is, outside of shooting that 1-3 against New York, it wasn't even worth anything because they were always going to win that game. But outside of shooting that 1-3, I think I've been disappointed. Ben Simmons really hasn't taken the step that I wanted him to. And if you can call that 1-3 a breadcrumb, call it a breadcrumb, but it still doesn't leave you feeling particularly good. And sure, his advanced numbers haven't suffered astronomically. They have regressed a little bit. But out of the two of them, I don't think it's any question that, Ingram's had the better season, and he is putting up the better numbers.
He's definitely, for the most part, putting up better numbers. I know I've got outside of the podcast and soon to be on the podcast, I got a bit of a reputation as a Ben Simmons stan and apologist. But, so in terms of evaluating this gap, I am definitely on the team that Ben Simmons is clearly still the better player. But with that being said, if I probably agree in this sort of 15-game sample size, Brandon Ingram has been phenomenal. And I think he's probably put up better numbers for the most part than Ben Simmons. I think, obviously, Ben Simmons' defensive numbers are still vastly superior, in my opinion.
Defensively, sure.
And obviously, he's the better passer, facilitator. Ben Simmons' steal numbers are elite. He's currently averaging 2.3 a game, which is good for second, third in the league. But ultimately, I have been a little bit disappointed with Ben Simmons' start to the season. The three was great, but you want to see a bit more of it. You don't want one every.
You want to see one a game, really, not necessarily a make. We've talked about this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a broken record for everyone. Everyone knows that he's got to shoot more threes, and put simply, he does. So I don't want to leap into a 10-minute tangent about that. But I definitely think so far this season, the conversation between comparing those two players, which will probably be an ongoing discussion for the rest of their careers, the way that they were pitted against each other at the start. I think it is the fact that it is a conversation now is a credit to the way Brandon Ingram's playing, because if last season it wasn't even in the conversation.
No, one was clearly an all-star and the other wasn't. But what I will say is right now, if I was picking all-star teams, Ingram would get my vote before Simmons. And it wouldn't be close.
But a bit of a Western Conference, Eastern Conference thing there.
What are you talking about? Ingram is thriving in the Western Conference. He's going against his elite teams.
His team is 11th, 6-11. He's playing great, but the Western Conference is stacked with stars. I'm not sure if he.
Oh no, I'm saying
I'd have to fill out the numbers there, but I'm not off the top of my head. I wouldn't call him a lock to make it.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if we got rid of conferences and I was purely picking my players for what I thought was the best 20 players for this All-Star game, before I got to Simmons, I would be going to Ingram, because I think he really has. I think he deserves it more. He's taken leaps. He's playing the best basketball of his career, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to penalize him for what the Pelicans are going through right now. And they still look pretty competitive at times throughout the game. They're just they're a work in progress.
But the flip side to that is it unfair to penalize Ben Simmons because he's playing on a much better team. I mean, it starts.
I'm not. I think the.
But his numbers have definitely regressed. Like, you throw in we're talking about this the other day about how Ingram is actually averaging slightly more rebounds than Simmons, but I posited that Simmons is still the better rebounder, because if you got Embiid and Horford clogging up the paint, taking all the boards, your numbers are going to dip. And especially, you've seen that with his scoring as well. Last year, Simmons is about 17, 18 points a game. He's currently about the 13 mark. That being said, the numbers are a little bit skewed with an injury and so on. But anyway, he's taken a bit of a step back in those respects. And I think it's difficult to evaluate the two when Ingram is given all the opportunities on his team, and Simmons has been forced to take a step back, and he's still acclimatizing to a new team with much, much better talent around him.
Look, if if we're talking, like, we have advanced stats for that, and they are pretty reliable. They're not concrete, and I won't get too deeply into them. But in terms of rebounding, and his defensive rebounding percentage, his total rebound percentage are higher than Simmons's. And that stat purely is an estimate of the percentage of available rebounds a player gets while he's on the floor. And that doesn't mean too much. It just means that, both of them are rebounding remarkably well because they're both at, pretty good marks for their positions. But if we're talking about opportunity, you're right. The usage rate between them, it's not even close. Ingram's at a 30% usage rate. Simmons is at a 19% usage rate. But I guess going back to that, you said something that really stuck out to me in terms of penalizing Simmons for being on a good team. Simmons is penalizing himself for being on a good team because his flaws are being exacerbated by said team. So I feel like if you're going to make that argument, you need to lean one way or the other because everything that Simmons does well right now is not being fully maximized by the team. But every flaw that he has is glaringly sticking out because the rest of the team has the same problem to obviously a lesser extent.
I agree, but the flip side to that is that his strengths of attacking the paint, getting post touches are being penalised because of the fact that you've got Embiid and Horford who operate down there as well.
Yeah, sure. And look, it's...
So I think that the presence of non-shooters around him, well, not non-shooters per se, but non-elite shooters around him, they definitely exacerbate his weaknesses, but they also hinder his strengths.
Sure.
It's a classic thought experiment. Like, for example, if you were to throw Ben Simmons on the Pelicans, what would his numbers look like from there if he had more opportunity, if he had some more shooting around and more touches, higher usage? It'd be a really interesting question. It's something that I'd frankly love to see.
But I think in terms of...
But I think it's really difficult to evaluate a player with a really high usage on a bad team and another player on a lower usage on a really good team.
And I would agree with you, circumstantial, luxuries and challenges really affect how a player is perceived. But the one thing that I would make the argument for is in terms of how they're playing and the skill sets they're exhibiting, Brandon Ingram, whilst I don't know if he'll ever get there, is playing like he's the best player. He's the go-to guy on a championship team. And that's just how the game is these days, because it is about if you can shoot, if you can get your spots, if you can really affect the offense. And right now, I would argue that the way his skill set is inclined, it is superior over these 15 games to that of Ben Simmons, who really is struggling with his spacing and playing with people that also can look him in the eye. I mean, having that much size in an offensive set, there are challenges to that, particularly when not all of them can shoot comfortably, and players like Embiid need to get their touches. So does Horford, actually, for the record. Horford's always been sneaky good at getting his touches, and that's how he brings the best out in his teams.
One interesting question I'll throw at you to just kind of wrap this one up is Brandon Ingram, Ben Simmons. We've talked about so far this season and their careers in the past. What about going forward? Who do you think has the highest ceiling between the two?
It's difficult because I almost see kind of this LeBron James versus Kevin Durant argument, because in terms of body types, there is some huge similarities between the two. And we've always said that, this is a LeBron James 2.0 if Simmons can ever shoot at a average, semi-below average clip from the three. And it's the same with Ingram. Right now, his offensive versatility and what he could do defensively and what he's showcased at times similarly allows this kind of image or this comparison to Kevin Durant. In terms of who has the highest ceiling, there's a chance. I don't think Philly's got it figured out. I actually am quite worried about Philly. I don't think they're anywhere near where I thought they would be. I think Brett Brown has a lot of issues he needs to reconcile. But Ben Simmons right now has the luxury of being on just a good team. Ingram, it's a 2-3 year journey for him just to climb back into the playoffs potentially. And like you've said, no one is ever going to put any credence in what he puts up unless it translates to postseason success and legitimate wins.
Yeah, I agree. We'll have to see on going forward. I think I love this kind of... Ingram is obviously got a lot of comparisons to Durant just in that body type, and Simmons with LeBron. I'd love if we got a battle between those two, not on that level, because I don't think anyone thinks Simmons is going to be a LeBron type.
No, I think that ship...
generational talent.
Sailed.
Even I'm not on the level that Ben Simmons is, the next coming of LeBron anymore.
Anymore is the key
But
word.
I think it's anymore.
Anymore.
Yes. Going into the going into this his career, maybe. But I think it's going to be a really interesting question because they've got this sort of contrasting body type and game, but they both have incredibly high ceilings. Obviously, I'm still on the Simmons camp. I still think his ceiling is truly elite.
Can I say one more thing?
Go for it.
If I was to be succinct in answering that question, I would have said my head says Ben Simmons will have the better career, but there's my gut and my instinct just... I think it's in Brandon Ingram's court because you can't disrespect the body of work Simmons has put up so far, and that's why I think ultimately I would say Simmons. But there is just this puncher's chance that I think could just manifest into this Bruce Lee arsenal of just assaults in terms of what he can do. For now, I have to say Simmons, but Ingram, ask me again next year, I might be swayed.
The fact that we're mentioning Ingram in the same breath as Simmons now, which we definitely were not doing this time a year or two ago, is a testament to the leaps that he's making, and also a slight indictment on the lack of leap that Simmons has made as well. But I guess we'll see. How it is going forward.
Absolutely. Now, Patrick, I want to hear a fun fact.
I'm pretty keen for a fun fact as well.
Despite being perhaps the most dominant player in the game's history and the holder of an educational doctorate, Shaquille O'Neal never mastered the three-point shot. Throughout the course of his career, the Platinum Award-winning rapper attempted 22 three-point shots, sinking a total of 1. Back to you, boys.
Thank you, fun fact guy. Now, Lucas, we're going to throw over to one of the more interesting headlines so far this season and the last week or so, but also I think one of our favourite topics of conversation going forward in the NBA at the moment. It's the Clippers, and specifically the duo of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who debuted about a week ago against the Celtics in the overtime victory. But I want to throw to you, the Clippers are currently at 12-5. They're third in the West, behind the Lakers number 1 and Denver number 2, who surprisingly crept back up there again despite a Jokic slow start.
It hasn't stopped yet, just quietly. I'm still angry at the joke with my fantasy league, but anyway.
Yeah, you did blow a pretty high pick on him. But in terms of looking at the Clippers, what have you made of the small sample size that we've seen of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George so far, and what do you think about them going forward?
At the moment, I'd say I'm a little disappointed in that it wasn't just that fairy tale story of these two elite players coming together and just instantaneously giving us a two-way dominance in this duo package. It's not something to be dismissive of, obviously. It's something that everyone's going to be thinking about, particularly as they get better and better. But yeah, I guess I guess what I'm saying, I'm rabbiting on, but there is this feeling of kind of like, oh, okay, so they're not yet there yet. I guess the patience, is infuriating because I am impatient, Patrick.
We know this. and listeners of the Between Buckets podcast know this. What do you think have been some of their issues so far? What's holding them back?
Kawhi's health. And it's funny because obviously he's played more games than Paul George, but Paul George has come back and he looks fresh. And I've said this, but there's the shots Kawhi's taking, the shots he's settling for. That's a factor. I think it's also both of them are the guys on past teams. And right now it is just getting touches, getting looks, and spacing properly. Both of them can do so much pretty much anywhere within, the halfway mark. And it's just going to take time.
Yeah, that's something. It's gonna take time. One thing, just on the both being the sort of alpha guys in the past, I think ultimately we both agree that Kawhi Leonard is the man on this team, and that's Paul George sort of slots in as the second fiddle. But it's going to be interesting whether it's an A and a B or a 1A and a 1B, because so far I definitely think Kawhi Leonard's the guy on this team. I think he's going to be the one taking the last shot most of the time. After what he did with Toronto last season, I think we both think he's the best player in the world. But it's going to be really interesting to see how Paul George slots into that, because he was fantastic last year with shoulder injuries, and he's been pretty phenomenal so far to start this one as well. I mean, in his second game back, he dropped 37 points with 6 threes in just 20 minutes. Yeah. And I know, obviously, that the numbers have regressed a little bit, but so far this season, he has been incredibly hot. He's averaging 25, which is the same as Kawhi so far. He's getting up 10 threes a game at 41%. And he's looking like that sort of MVP candidate that he was last season. I think the way that they fit together is going to be really interesting. And also with the depth that they've got, it's not just how can Kawhi Leonard and Paul George fit together. It's how, if Lou Williams, how is he going to get his shots? If he's not getting his shots, how much value is he going to give? Montrezl Harrell's been fantastic, and it's a good problem to have that you've got all these great players, but the way that they mesh, especially in late game scenarios when you've got all these fantastic players who have a proven history of coming up big and at the end of big games, it's going to be a challenge for how they fit on the court.
The problem
together.
also is that, ostensibly, Paul George is outplaying Kawhi Leonard. And whilst that's probably not going to do too much, because I think everyone understands, who brought who to this team and the resumes of Kawhi against Paul George, and that Kawhi does have, a pedigree that Paul George hasn't yet been able to indulge in. In your offense, and just for your players, if you've got one guy that's clearly in better form right now, be it because of health or whatever reason, there is just a natural inclination to value him over someone who's, clearly and openly not healthy. I think Kawhi's playing at about 75-80% right now. And whilst Doc Rivers has the coaching prowess and the personnel to juggle that well, and that there's still going to be, a high Western Conference finish, there will be a transition phase. And I guess I'm just concerned that I think everything needs to be set by that final quarter of the season. And right now they just have the talent and the experience to just make their way. But it is going to be a roller coaster, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if you hear about it later on, in a few years down the track. Just juggling so much talent is always difficult. And it's never easy. As, the fall of the Heat, the fall of Golden State, the fall of the Lakers before that, it's a thing. It's been well documented.
And the good news is that they've got 65 odd games to try and figure it
that
out.
That is why
why
no one can rule them out. And it's why even when you watch,
and that's why it's hardly alarm bells ringing so far, especially because they've been winning these games.
And they've beaten good teams, and they're not even in full stride. And that's why no media personality can rule them out on television. No one wants to even go there, because providing that they can suit up their best players, they have the chance of beating anyone.
With the Lakers' hot start, they're currently at 15-2. Do you still rest on the Clippers as the team to beat in the West, especially in terms of the playoffs?
Without a doubt. I've been very impressed with LeBron, obviously. That's not really a foreign thing to hear.
Nothing new there. We haven't been for the last 17, 18
but
years.
More just, he is playing better than he has the last 2 years. He's really in the thick of that Cleveland prime of his again, and he's had no issues acclimatizing to Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis and LeBron, I think the health later on in the season is something that I still am a little concerned about, and I think that in terms of one team against the other, the Clippers just have the depth, and it's not close.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I agree that I think the Clippers' depth is what separates the two teams, but just in a vacuum, the better duo, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, or LeBron and Anthony Davis, who would you pick for that?
Right now it's LeBron and Anthony Davis, and that's because they've happened to be able to play together in training camp, the off season, and the first 16, 17 games of the season. Whereas if you think about it, PG was chilling, having shoulder surgery and doing his rehab on the side of the court while watching his boys train, and then Kawhi's only played 11 games for the Clippers. PG's at, 6? 3? So they've played 3 games together. It'd be foolish to make the argument that they look smoother or more equipped, or they're in better sync than Anthony Davis and LeBron, because they've just, on the court and off the court, got so many more reasons why they're excelling.
Yeah, I agree. I think going into the season, I thought LeBron and Anthony Davis was the better duo, and I'm still currently at that. I think their ceiling is particularly high, especially in the sense that I think that they work together as a 1-2 punch a little bit better than Kawhi and Paul George can, and that's partially because of the fact that you've got a point guard / wing / whatever LeBron is, and on one hand and a big man in Davis on the other. Their pick and roll 1-2 punch duo is phenomenal, and I think the ceiling of their duo is ultimately higher, but I agree. It's still the Clippers' depth that is what is putting them, at least for me, as the number one team, the team to beat in the West.
Absolutely.
It'll be interesting to see going forward, but so far they've looked pretty good, and they're going to be a really, really good team.
Yeah. No, I think we can agree on that.
Alrighty, we might call it a day there for myself, Lucas Pearce, and Patrick Cross. It's been a pleasure.
It's, again, just hearing my name changes what I'm waiting for in the day.
I'll talk to you again soon, Patrick.
Absolutely, mate. You take it easy.